warm introduction. I'll speak for about 40 minutes and then maybe we can have a conversation after that. I thought it important to repeat what was said by Bindu on welcoming what the Justice Hema Committee report has said. It is unusual in our part of the world to have material of this sort made public. I think it is up to now the film industry and society at large to make sure, A, that those things that have happened see justice in some form, B, that the film industry in this state, a state that I love, by the way. I think if there is a state in India that I would hold up to the rest of South Asia as being an example of what our constitutional republic stands for, it would be this state. I think that the problems of the film industry are universal. The Me Too movement started with Hollywood. But since we have the material at hand, since we have the committee's report at hand, I think it's important that those voices that are loud, voices like Mohanlal's, voices like Mammootty's, like Fahad Fasil's, are heard on this issue, and that the problems that the report has made visible are tackled. I'll break what I'm saying into three parts. The shortest part I'll start with. I think that the 4th of June represents a moment that is more important than many of us think it is. I do not exclude myself from the set that on the 3rd of June felt that we were on a road that we would continue to be on. The numbers on the 4th of June showed that that is not the case. If somebody from the outside were to look at the government of India, they would not be able to fully understand or comprehend why things have changed. The Home Minister is the same, the Finance Minister is the same, the Foreign Minister is the same, the Defense Minister is the same, the National Security Advisor is the same, even the Speaker of the Lok Sabha is the same. So then what is different? The difference comes in two things. The first is on matters of substance and the second is on matters of style. I'll try and say a little more about this at the end as well. But on the matter of substance, some of us had assumed that India had slipped into a democracy with permanent one-party rule, as we have in Gujarat. My state, Gujarat, I came of voting age many decades ago. But from the time that I was 18 till only a few years ago, the same person represented Gujarat in the Lok Sabha, a man called Kashiram Rana, for decades. There was no change. Similarly, for more than 2.5 decades now, Gujarat is notionally a two-party state, but it has one-party rule. So one party has won every single Vidhan Sabha poll, one party, that same party, the BJP, has won every single Lok Sabha poll. So there's no real choice. The opposition exists, but it exists on sufferance. The ruling party doesn't really want it to be there. And in the first past the post system, this is possible, that a party with 1/3 of the vote in a fragmented nation has the chance of being more or less, if not in permanent, in long-term rule. And I think that the 4th of June, one reason why the people who support the BJP thought it was a defeat, while the people who don't vote for it thought it was a victory, was the fact that this idea of a single party dominating into the mid-term future, if not the long-term future, was laid to rest. The second thing that the 4th of June tells us, and this is the point on style, is that the idea that we are a country in need of a savior, and that savior is present in the form of only one person, one man, and that one man will deliver to us the solutions to all of our problems, which have been created by somebody else. And not only our problems, but also solve the problems of the world by becoming the king of the G20 and so on. That was also laid to rest. So on substance and on style, there has been a shift. What that shift means, I'll speak about at the end. I'll turn to how we got here. So India, after 47, was essentially till 1990, and I would say 1996 actually. In the India of these decades, government meant Congress, except for a 2-year period in the 70s, 77, 79, and a 2-year period after Rajiv dies, just before Rajiv dies, 89, 91. You have non-Congress governments, but for the rest of it, from 47 on, government, union government means Congress, and a Congress more or less with the sort of majority that Mr. Modi had between 2014 and the 4th of June. I say this because while it is true that the reason we have a liberal written polity represented by the preamble and by the fundamental rights, it is true that this comes to us because of the fact that the Congress was dominant. It is also true that the majoritarian aspects of our constitution come from the Congress. We did not need the BJP on those specific issues where Orthodox Hindus felt that though we were a secular modern state, we should not introduce the elements that went against the grain of what they thought their faith, our faith, my faith, and this nation's culture, which they felt was their culture and theirs alone represented. It showed in a few ways. It showed in Article 25. So Article 25, the right to freely propagate and practice religion, freely, the word freely exists, is the result of a long debate in the Constituent Assembly. The debate is informed by the opinion of a man called Frank Anthony, who tells the Constituent Assembly that for the Christians, propagation is an article of faith, that you are in a majority, he's telling the Hindus, and it is fine if we have restrictive laws on this, but he said, please consider the fact that for Christians, the idea that you bring the good word, you spread the good word, you tell the story of Jesus, and you invite people into your faith is fundamental. It's an article of faith. It's one of the pillars on which many Christians believe their faith rests. So there's a lively debate. Ambedkar in his draft has the word freely convert. And at the end, when after the debate, the text reads freely propagate, he did not offer comment because the debates make it clear that propagate and convert mean the same thing based on what the debates say. That I talk about the faith that I want to invite you to, I ask you if you want to have a seat with me, and you are free then to come and sit with me and worship the God or the deity of your choice. Very little resistance is offered by most people, including conservatives like K.M. Munshi, who was a fellow Gujarati the one specific voice of dissent comes from a 26-year-old man called Loknath Mishra, who is also a congressman. His uncle and all went on to become the Chief Justices of India. He says that Hindus have obliged the minorities of this country by declaring that the republic will be secular, so we don't need to give them anything else. It should remain here. He was reading from a paper, just like we have in Parliament in our time when people read. Nehru saw that he was reading and objected. The fact is, you should not be reading out documents in the Lok Sabha. But except for him, most people, everybody I should say, accepts that Christians have come to the Constituent Assembly, they've asked for this right, it should be given to them. Article 25, the right to freely propagate and practice. The fear always has been on the subcontinent, Muslims do not proselytize. It is the Christians who do. The fear was always that if we make it easy, Dalits and Adivasis will bolt. They will leave the faith and they will go either into Christianity or they will go into Islam, and that will mean that we will lose our grasp, our control over the nation. That fear was always there. The way in which this was resolved was that India, after 47, in the 60s especially, and then in 70s there is a famous Supreme Court judgment called Stanislaus versus State of Madhya Pradesh, decided that propagation, did not mean to convert, despite the text, the two words being more or less the same in the debates. And secondly, that if you were to allure somebody, that would constitute a crime. Now, what does the word allure mean? The law says in India, and the courts have accepted it, that if I tell you after you die, you go to a place which is called heaven, and if you worship on the path that I worship, you will go there. That is allurement. That's the same thing as giving a bribe. This is the law in India. And in this convoluted fashion, we were able to ensure that Article 25 is both a fundamental right and a criminal offense. Basically, what the state is telling you through the Constitution, that you are free, please go and propagate your faith, whatever faith it is. Spread your faith in the people, bring them into your faith, but the moment you do that, you go to jail. So there's no consistency in the way that the words are read. A fundamental right is defined as one which enjoys a high degree of freedom, a high degree of protection from encroachment by the state. So this is not something that the state can intrude into lightly. But just like with freedom of speech, Article 19, 25 has been made a dead letter. It doesn't mean anything. There is no right, there is no freedom of religion in this country. But the recognition of it has not come, because it has become accepted that missionary activity is essentially negative, is essentially destructive, and is not to be tolerated. And this comes from people, including those who come from a background like my own, where in the absence of these people, we would not have been educated. So that's one way in which we were able to resolve the problem of wanting to see ourselves as being this free and liberal nation with a forward-thinking constitution, but also to have our base instinct, our base fear reflected in the law in some way. The second instance is on cow slaughter. So the Constituent Assembly debates, they are worth reading. The Hindu members, the Muslim members tell the Hindus, we know that this is sensitive for you. We are okay if you ban it, if you ban cattle slaughter. Let us do it honestly. Let us put it in words that for the majority in this country, cattle slaughter is offensive because it is seen as going against the grain of what the Hindu faith says about the cow mother, and for this reason we want to ban. But the Hindus say, no, that is not what we are saying. The Hindus say that the cow is an economic unit, that even a cow that stops milching, that cannot produce milk anymore, is still valuable because it is a factory for manure, for dung. The two more things they say. One is that cattle slaughter has been increasing and the population of cows has been decreasing. They don't explain in the debate why, if the cow is economically productive in the era of tractors, the population is going down. Surely somebody would want more cows and make more money out of them rather than kill them. But this is not explained. And the second thing they say is that India is, and this is a fact, India is a very poor country with a great deal of malnourishment. So we need a lot more milk. And we can't get that milk if we open up a cattle slaughter. The Muslims make the economic argument. They say that it's not true. There is a historian of our constitution, a man called Austin, who points out that more Hindus were involved and are actually involved today as well in slaughter than Muslims. But despite this contradiction, we have the article which says that for economic reasons, that the state shall endeavor, that's what the article says, 42, that we will produce this economy where animal husbandry is an important part, and to promote that and to make sure that it becomes strong, we will endeavor to ban cattle slaughter. I have tried and I have studied this for many years. Nobody in this country knows what the actual law on cattle slaughter is. And the reason is, in some states, there is no ban in the Northeast. In some states, there is a ban on cows of a certain age, but not on buffaloes. In some states, there is a ban both on cows of a certain age and on buffaloes of a certain age, but not on male buffaloes. In some states, the law is something else. There is no consistency at all. The law is whatever the sensibility of that state is. If Gujarat is intolerant to cattle slaughter, then there will be a full ban on it. The punishment in Gujarat for cattle slaughter is life. No economic crime in India attracts life. You could rob a bank of 50,000 crore rupees. The punishment on the book of law is not life. If you are accused of cattle slaughter, the punishment you are booked on is life in jail. I'll come to some of the laws later. This period which the Congress dominates and where the hypocrisy of the majority shows in these ways, that, we don't want cow slaughter because it is a problem with our religion. We want it because it is very good for the economy. Or, we don't have a problem with propagation. We just don't want you to convert anybody. These two, the main two fears, are the ones that dominate till the 80s. At which point, the BJP rises, but the Janasangh, which is for the youngsters here, it's formed in 1951. It is the predecessor to the Bharatiya Janata Party. And it was called the Bharatiya Janasangh. The word Sangh comes from the the RSS. So the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh gets into trouble after Gandhi is killed, and its leader is picked up, and many of them are jailed. When they come out, they have a discussion, and this is there in the official history of the BJP. When they come out, they say, we need political defense because nobody is going to stand up for us. The next time, their leader was a man called Golwalkar, who was the longest serving Sarsanga Chalak. So to protect the RSS and to protect its ideas and to spread its ideas, the Bharatiya Janasangh is formed. Till 1990, so from 51 to 90, 40 years, 4 decades, there is not a single chief minister in any state in India which the BJP has won on its own. In a couple of states, in an alliance with partners, states like Madhya Pradesh, they were able to form government, but nationwide, for 40 years, the vote share is single digits. This changes in the mid-80s. So Vajpayee loses the 1984 poll and he steps down. They get 2 seats. And Advani takes over and makes the Babri Masjid campaign the dominant issue on which the party will mobilize. He writes in his book, Advani does, that he did not realize what the mobilizing potential of the Ayodhya movement was. Something that even youngsters today will be able to tell, that if you have a mob that's going after a minority, you will find a lot of support. So Advani is thrilled to find this issue. The idols were smuggled into the mosque only within months of the party being formed in 1951. But they have not raised the issue till the mid-80s. But once he picks it up, the vote share begins to expand. So from single digits all the way up to the mid-80s, in the early 90s, it doubles and goes to 17%, 18%, and then under Mr. Modi, it has doubled once more to 36%. On the back of the issues that we will talk about. What is the direction we were going in that the 4th of June, the results of the 4th of June said to us, this is not where you're going, we are going somewhere else. So let us consider another state. Let's look at Pakistan. So when Pakistan's Constituent Assembly, which debates the idea of the nature of the government, within 6 months of Jinnah passing away. So Jinnah dies very soon after Gandhi. And 6 months after he goes, his successor, a man called Liaquat Ali Khan, he puts up what he calls the Objectives Resolution, which opens with the phrase from the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and says that sovereignty of the Pakistani state will rest not with the people, but with Allah. So the minorities, there were a large number of minorities in Pakistan then because of the Bengalis, the Hindu Bengalis in what was called East Pakistan. They said that, why are we doing this? That Jinnah had promised us a secular state and so on. And the other side said, but he had also promised us a state based on faith. But Liaquat in his defense says that he tries to explain why Pakistan needs to be a state, a government with laws that are linked to religion. So this is happening, firstly, this is happening only within a few years of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 5 or 6 years. He says, Liaquat says, that mankind has run ahead of its spiritual self, that humankind, that science has produced a human, a man, who has dissociated, has detached from his spiritual side and is willing to therefore do things like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What Pakistan would do, what the state would do, would be to bring that back. They would try and bring morality, ethics, spiritualism perhaps, into government and so into society through law. The question is, okay, how do you do it? So they could not figure out how to do it. For 11 years, there was no constitution. So India began writing its constitution, again, if the youngsters may not know, before 1947. And Patel, we are often told that instead of Nehru, if you had Patel, Patel is dead by 1950. He dies in 1950. He's a very unwell man in that period. And most of the work on the princely states had finished before 1947 August. So there was not much for him to do after that. So there is no real, if not Nehru and we had Patel, what would happen? Nothing would have happened. The man would have died anyway. The Pakistanis are not able to produce a constitution and the army takes over. So Ayub Khan, the Indian army does not have any Indian officers till 1918. So the Indians performed really well in the First World War across the country. So if you look at, say, France, at one point, so the First World War is actually two wars fought. One fought in Western Europe, in trenches in Belgium and France, where the British army, the BEF it's called, and the French army are fighting the Germans. And on the Eastern Front, the German army is fighting the Russians. At one point, France was importing 10,000 goats a month into France because the Indian contingent, which was mostly from Punjab, had to have that as their dietary requirement. So till 1918, there were no Indians who were officers in the army. But because of the good performance, then they start to bring in. Ayub Khan was one of them. So when he's only about 40 or so, he becomes the chief of the army because the British have all gone. And then he takes over the government. He also cannot come up with a way to produce what Liaquat has said the aim is, which is that you use the government, you use the state to produce laws that make society the right kind of society. But since they cannot find those laws, they try a bit, and I'll try and come to that. What they do is they tried exclusion after that. So in the 60s, Pakistan constitutionally, which is a law they have today as well, they say non-Muslims cannot become the president. That Sikhs, Hindus, Ahmadiyas and Christians and so on cannot by law become the president of Pakistan. And in the 70s, under Bhutto, Z.A. Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, this is extended to the prime ministership. So by law, no non-Muslim can become the prime minister. But this is the only extent to which Pakistan was an Islamic. There was nothing Islamic about it. And the reason is that if you go to Lahore, if you go to Peshawar, if you go to Dhaka, and you ask somebody, what does 420 mean? What does 302 mean? What does 144 mean? They know what those numbers mean. This generation might actually forget because we have changed all the laws now, but they know that 302 is murder, that 144 is about the right to assembly, that 420 is about cheating, because they had the same laws. whatever the country called itself, whether you called yourself the Islamic Republic of Pakistan or whether you called yourself the Secular Republic of India, you had the same law. This began to change. And it began to change in small ways at first. So the subcontinent's Muslims are quite observant during Ramzan. You don't need to force them to fast. Most of them fast in any case. But laws were brought about to make sure that restaurants were closed in the afternoon, cinema halls were closed in the afternoon. And because of that, because just like in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, visually you cannot tell who is Hindu and who is Muslim for the most part. So then minorities who were having food would get beaten up on the assumption that they were Muslims who were not keeping their fast. The other way in which they tried was through zakat. So the Zia brought in a law which said that at the end of Ramzan, 2.5% from fixed deposits would be cut. Two things happened. One is that the Shia said that we are already paying a tithe to the clerics who run Shiism, whether it is the Aakar Khanis or whether it is the Ismailis or whether it is the 12ers who are in Qom and so on. And so we should not be made to pay this. So the state says, okay, you don't pay it. But what happens is a lot of Sunnis also start to withdraw the money during Ramzan so that it's not debited, or to claim even that they are Shia so that they are not subjected to this. The point being that this is the sort of thing that the state came up with. The idea was very grand, that we will try and merge science and humanity. But the result, the product was really petty. In the 70s, I think it was 1974, Z.A. Bhutto's parliament apostatized the Ahmadis. So this is a community that cannot call themselves Muslim and more or less can't vote. This, I think, we should try and keep in mind when we ask ourselves, what is it that we were trying to do with the government when the BJP imposed what it called the ideology of Hindutva on this country? What do? So in 2015, they criminalize the possession of beef. So we spoke about how the constitutional mandate is on cattle slaughter. It says nothing about beef. In 2015, two states, first Maharashtra and then Haryana, they criminalize the possession of beef with a reversal of the presumption of innocence. So what does the presumption of innocence mean? That if I am found with a gun in my hand from which smoke is coming out and there's a body next to me, the police has to prove that I shot this person and I killed him. If you are accused of having beef in your fridge or in your van, it is for you to prove that that meat is not beef, that is the law. After these two states, more states began to bring up, more BJP states began to add this to the state laws. And the life sentence for cow slaughter in Gujarat comes after this. So the law is tightened. It used to be a few years, then made 10 years, and now it has become life. In Gujarat in 2019, a man was accused of serving beef at his daughter's wedding, which had happened some days or weeks or months ago. And the police told the judge, we cannot prove that this was the case. The FSL, the Forensic Sciences Laboratory, sent a report back saying we don't know what this is. The man was a Muslim, obviously. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in jail. The interesting thing is that the judge was right. That is the law. Gujarat has that law. The law says you have to prove. It's not for the government to. It's not for the police to prove. The High Court set aside this. The High Court was embarrassed, I think, because you can't have such laws in the modern state, where the accused has to show that meat that had been consumed, and we don't even know whether it was meat, all those weeks or months ago, was not beef. So they set aside that sentence, but the state has appealed because that is the law. Gujarat once again in 2020 tightened the law which says that Hindus and Muslims cannot buy and rent or lease properties from one another. This is in every Gujarati city, including mine, Surat. If a Hindu wants to lease or rent or sell a property to a Muslim, they have to file an affidavit declaring their religion. The district magistrate or the collector will determine whether the sale or lease will go through. And this determination will be made on the basis of what the government calls improper clustering. If they find too many Muslims in, then you cannot lease or rent. In effect, foreigners can lease, rent and buy property in Gujarat's cities where Gujarati Muslims cannot. And this is the law. And this law, and the most recent tightening of this came in 2020. Muslims are the only part of the population in this country for whom divorce is a criminal act. So in 2017, the Supreme Court said that the delivery of triple talaq in one sitting was not valid. What does that mean? If a Muslim is accused of delivery, of saying these three words to his wife in one sitting, talaq, 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 they are not married, they are not divorced. They continue to be married. In 2019, 2 years later, Parliament criminalizes the utterance of those words. And what that means is, if a Hindu is accused or a Christian is accused of saying these three words to his wife, talaq, 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 in one sitting, they are not divorced, it is not a crime. If a Muslim man is accused of saying these words to his wife, they are not divorced because the Supreme Court has already made the delivery of triple talaq invalid in one sitting. But it is a crime. There was no reason to have introduced this except to persecute. Just like there was no reason to have dissociated cow slaughter and beef, one from the other in law, except for the fact that that old lie about cattle slaughter being banned as an economic reason was proved to be a lie, was shown to be a lie. That it is actually about beef. We don't want it here. Enough has been said about Kashmir for me not to repeat for the most part, but just to, in very broad brush terms, the only part of the country where security forces use the 12-gauge shotgun which fires bird shot out of unrifled barrels. So what is called the pellet gun, it has blinded more than 1,000 people. Children who are nowhere near the site of a protest are somewhere else. The barrel doesn't have rifling, and the ammunition is shot meaning ball bearings. It just goes anywhere. It has even hurt the same people who have fired the weapon. Only part of this country where that is used. The Public Safety Act, we are told that Article 370's gutting was necessary because of the fact that we wanted one country, one law and one constitution and so on. Kashmir has a law which is special to Kashmir, the Public Safety Act. What does it say? If the government thinks you will do something wrong in future, all states have this law by the way, including Kerala. If it thinks you will do something wrong in the future, because of that it wants to put you in jail now. You have not been accused of any crime. You have not been convicted of any crime. These are called preventive detention laws. So the Public Safety Act remains, while a 370 removed pretty much most things from the book there, this law has been kept because you want Kashmiris to be jailed easily for up to 6 months. And once you come out after 6 months, there is a revolving door. They send you back in again. You can be indefinitely kept in jail without there being a crime merely because the state thinks you are a threat. This is not how democratic societies should be run. The permanent majority, if it had come to that, would have produced more such things. If you look at 2019, when Mr. Modi comes back to power, he comes back with a series of laws in the first few months itself, in 2019 itself, on citizenship, on triple talaq, on Kashmir. The Supreme Court obviously then sort of obliges the agenda with the Babri judgment. All of that come within months of the victory in 2019. Something similar would have happened this year. If you read the Waqf bill was presented to Parliament and there was opposition. It was sent to a committee. We don't know where it will go from there. If you had 300 MPs from the BJP, it would not have been sent to the committee. But the interesting thing is, if you read the bill, it is quite granular and quite detailed. It talks about the Waqf properties of Ismaili Khojas and Dawoodi Bohras, which are two dominant Gujarati Sevener Shia. Okay. So somebody had thought about the bill for some time. It was not written after 4th of June. It had been written and had been prepared to be passed through a parliament. Similarly for lateral entry and all the other U-turns that we have seen. These are laws conceived on the confidence that the BJP will come back with 300 seats, if not more. 370 was the number that the Prime Minister himself gave in Parliament. In Lok Sabha, he said that we will win 370 seats. We should have expected this to continue. That what Pakistan did in the 70s, after having not being able to achieve the fusion of religion and state to any meaningful effect and start to go after minorities, that is what we would have done as well. I don't know how many people have, I keep saying it each time I speak, but in our history, we have never had a union cabinet which has had no representation from Muslims. We have not had one since 2014. The BJP has 240 MPs in the Lok Sabha, 90 in the Rajya Sabha. They had 303 in the Lok Sabha in 2019. They had 282 in 2014. Not a single Muslim. This is not what the preamble tells us this country is about. Exclusion of this nature is not what this nation's politics should be about. But it had become that. June the 4th has put a pause on it. I could be optimistic and say it has put a stop to it, that it will not happen again, or it will not happen again in the same way. The persona of Mr. Modi, that who was able to widen the appeal of the BJP to people in the middle classes and non-Hindi belt states, is quite unique. I don't think that the person who comes after him will have the same assets and the same advantages that he has. Whether he has them or not, we don't know. Certainly the seat share and the vote share says that he does, but if the idea is that this is a person who can bring about development and so on, then obviously there are doubts that he's not any different from the people who came before him. But he was able to widen the appeal. And his not being able to deliver a majority tells us that at least in the medium term, by which I mean 10, 15, 20 years, we seem to be safe from going down the route that Pakistan took in the 70s, 80s and 90s and continues to take. Though it should be said also that in many ways Pakistan is secularizing law, that it is going back to what India began with, while between 2014 and 24 we had gone in the other direction. I'll conclude by trying to forecast what will happen given the reality we have. So for the first time, Mr. Modi faces opposition of some sort from the NDA. The reason why the Waqf bill and lateral entry and the other issues haven't gone through is not because of the strength of the opposition, but because of the alliance partners who don't have any kind of ideological investment in what the BJP does. And so they will always have some kind of problem with what the BJP writes up. The second is that he faces a stronger opposition, which he has not had, which is more vocal, more visible, and more able to push back, including in parliament. And the third is he faces opposition inside the party. It might not be visible, but politics is ultimately about taking power. You don't become a politician to go to the Rajya Sabha or the Lok Sabha and not aspire to a ministry. Once you aspire to a ministry, you want a better ministry. You want a more powerful ministry. And this might not necessarily be a bad thing. You come into politics with the idea that you want to improve this country and you have the right sort of energy, the right ideas. And so we should expect that this will happen within the BJP itself. The issue is what happens in ideological parties where the leader is weak. And what happens is normally this leader in an ideological party will face challengers who try to be more extreme than him. And we will see this happen in this country. That every time there is a move, let's say to remove a chief minister from some state, that chief minister will act in a way that will embarrass the union government through its allies, either by using bulldozers or by passing some law saying that Muslims are required to put up their names, which will not go through, but it will actually embarrass the union government. And this is not something that Mr. Modi has had to face. For these three reasons, and of course, you've got the fact that India, though our civil society might be small, it is quite vibrant. While the justice system in many ways is very statist, it tends to favor the government, tends to favor the police. It is still notionally at least independent. And we must expect that in a time when the government is less strong than it was since 2014, you will find judges who are willing to give bail slightly more easier, are willing to do the right thing, not fearing the pressure from what the government says. These are the reasons why I think that June the 4th was a moment of signal importance, that while from the outside, with the same government, the same prime minister, the same union cabinet, it doesn't seem like much has changed. A lot has shifted and will continue to remain shifted. And for this reason, all of us should be hopeful of the direction that this country has now taken and hopefully will continue to be on in the years to come. Thank you very much.